The first white rose arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, nestled in tissue paper inside an elegant cream box, and Grace couldn't stop staring at it like it might suddenly sprout wings and explain itself. She stood in the doorway of her small apartment, holding the delivery with confusion painted across her face. No card, no note, just one perfect white rose with petals so pristine they looked hand-selected by someone who actually cared about flowers. Grace Collins had lived 26 years without receiving mysterious floral deliveries, and now this appeared on her doorstep like something out of a movie she would never believe. "Maybe it's a mistake," she said aloud to her empty apartment, though her heart did a strange little flip that suggested she hoped it wasn't. Grace worked as a veterinary assistant at Riverside Animal Hospital, a job that filled her days with wagging tails, nervous cats, and the occasional parrot that swore more than a sailor. She loved it despite the chaos, despite the modest paycheck that kept her in this cramped studio apartment with the leaky faucet she kept meaning to fix. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, built from hard work and determination after her parents passed away when she was 21. The rose found a home in a water glass on her kitchen counter because Grace didn't own a proper vase. All day at work, she thought about it. Who would send flowers? Her dating life existed somewhere between non-existent and tragic. The last guy she'd gone out with spent the entire dinner talking about his fantasy football league, and then asked her to split the check after ordering the most expensive steak on the menu. "You're distracted today," her coworker Monica observed, watching Grace nearly put cat food in the dog bowls during afternoon feeding time. "Someone sent me a flower," Grace admitted, correcting her mistake. Monica's eyebrows shot up, like a secret admirer, like a mystery that makes no sense. When Tuesday rolled around the following week, another white rose arrived. Same cream box, same lack of explanation. Grace's confusion morphed into curiosity that buzzed under her skin like electricity. By the third Tuesday, she was waiting by the window like a detective on a stake-up, watching for the delivery person. A standard courier service dropped it off, the driver looking bored and completely unaware of the mystery he was perpetuating. Grace chased him down the stairs in her pajamas. "Excuse me, who sent this?" The driver checked his tablet. "Just says the order comes from Prestige Florals downtown. That's all I got, lady." Prestige Florals occupied a corner shop in the expensive part of the city where Grace rarely ventured. She called them during her lunch break, standing outside the hospital in the spring sunshine while traffic hummed past. "I'm sorry, but our client's information is completely confidential," the woman on the phone said in a tone that suggested she'd had this conversation before. "I can tell you that you have a standing weekly order paid for in advance, but I cannot disclose who arranged it. For how long?" A pause. "1 year." Grace nearly dropped her phone. "A year? Someone paid for flowers for an entire year?" "Yes, madam. Every Tuesday, 1 white rose. We have excellent quality standards, so you can expect consistency." This information should have been reassuring. Instead, it made the mystery exponentially more complicated. Who had that kind of money to spend on a year's worth of weekly roses for someone like her? Grace mentally scrolled through every person she knew, trying to match anyone to this elaborate gesture. Her friend circle was small. There was Monica from work, her neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who was 72 and barely remembered Grace's name, and a few acquaintances from college she mostly interacted with through social media. No mysterious wealthy benefactors lurked in that lineup. April brought rain and more roses. Grace found herself anticipating Tuesdays with an excitement she hadn't felt about anything in years. The roses accumulated in various containers around her apartment because she still hadn't bought a proper vase. It seemed wrong somehow to make practical purchases around a mystery. "Maybe it's someone from the hospital," Monica suggested one afternoon while they restocked examination rooms. "Like a grateful pet owner whose dog you saved." "I'm a veterinary assistant, not a surgeon. The most dramatic thing I do is hold down angry cats for their shots." "You're good at it, though. Remember that German shepherd last month? You were the only one who could calm him down." Grace did remember. The dog had been terrified, shaking so hard after a car accident that even Dr. Morrison couldn't get near him. Grace had sat on the floor for 40 minutes, just talking softly until the dog trusted her enough to be examined. The owner had been almost as grateful as the dog. "The owner was a woman in her 50s, Grace said, dismissing the theory. "This feels different." What she didn't say was that the roses felt romantic. Each one was a whisper of attention from someone who thought about her every week, who planned and paid and arranged for beauty to arrive at her doorstep. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced since her parents died, since she'd become just another person trying to survive in an expensive city. The truth was, Grace had been lonely. She'd gotten good at ignoring it, at filling her life with work and routines that kept the emptiness at bay. But the roses cracked something open inside her, a reminder that maybe someone out there noticed her existence. By June, she had 24 roses pressed in books because she couldn't bear to throw them away as they wilted. The act of preserving them felt important, like keeping evidence that this strange, wonderful thing was actually happening. Summer heat baked the city. Grace started walking through the downtown area during her lunch breaks, past prestige florals with its elegant window displays, wondering if her mysterious sender ever stood in that same spot. She studied men on the street like clues in a puzzle, trying to imagine which one might harbor secret affections. The hospital held its annual charity fundraiser in July, a fancy dinner that Grace normally skipped because she couldn't afford the ticket price. This year, Dr. Morrison insisted the whole staff attend for free as his guests. Grace borrowed a dress from Monica, dark blue and simple, the kind of thing that made her feel like she was playing dress-up as a more sophisticated person. The event took place at the Grandview Hotel, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors that made Grace's borrowed heels click with authority she didn't feel. She clutched a glass of champagne she was too nervous to drink, and tried to look like she belonged among the wealthy donors who'd paid $500 a plate. "You look terrified," Dr. Morrison said, appearing at her elbow with a kind smile. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and the gentle manner that made him perfect for working with animals. "Try to enjoy yourself. You've earned a night off." "I don't really fit in here," Grace admitted. "Neither do most of these people, they just have better dress budgets." See that man by the bar? Made his fortune in manufacturing. Started out working factory floors just like regular folks. Grace followed his gaze to a man who looked to be in his early 30s, tall and solid in a way that suggested time spent doing more than sitting behind a desk. He had dark hair, strong features, and was listening to an older couple with focused attention that seemed genuine. Something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with quiet confidence, made Grace's breath catch. "Who is he?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Trevor Young. Owns Young Industries. They make industrial equipment, machinery, that sort of thing. His father started the company, but Trevor turned it into something massive. He's one of our biggest donors." Trevor Young. The name meant nothing to Grace, but she couldn't stop watching him. He laughed at something the older man said, the sound carrying across the room, warm and genuine. Then, as if sensing her attention, His eyes found hers across the crowded ballroom. The moment stretched. Grace felt pinned in place by his gaze, dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her in 2 seconds. Then someone stepped into his line of sight and the connection broke. Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I need air," she mumbled to Dr. Morrison, setting down her untouched champagne. The hotel's terrace overlooked the city lights, offering a view Grace could never afford in her lifetime of saving. She leaned against the railing and tried to calm the strange racing of her heart. This was ridiculous. A man had looked at her across a room. That was all. It meant nothing. The party too much. Grace spun around. Trevor Young stood in the terrace doorway, jacket unbuttoned, looking at her with curiosity rather than judgment. "I'm not really a party person," Grace said, immediately feeling foolish. Obviously, she wasn't a party person. Her borrowed dress and cheap shoes probably announced that to everyone in the room. Me neither. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, maintaining a respectful distance. "I prefer smaller groups, real conversations." "Then why come to something like this? Obligation, expectations, the usual reasons people do things they'd rather not." He glanced at her, a slight smile on his face. "Though I'm glad I came tonight." Grace's heart did that flipping thing again. "You don't even know me." "Not yet. I'm Trevor." "Grace." They shook hands. His grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Grace felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. "You work at Riverside Animal Hospital," Trevor said, and at her surprised expression he added, "I saw you arrive with Dr. Morrison. He talks about his staff constantly, says you have a gift with animals." "I just pay attention to them. Most people don't. That's the definition of a gift." They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. Grace found herself relaxing, laughing at his stories about business meetings gone wrong and his confession that he had a dog named Murphy, who refused to understand that the couch was not a bed. Trevor listened when she talked, really listened, in a way that made Grace feel like she was the only person at the entire fundraiser. "I should get back," Trevor said eventually, regret clear in his voice. "I'm supposed to give a speech about charitable giving that I've already forgotten." "Good luck," Grace said, surprised by how much she didn't want him to leave. He hesitated in the doorway. "Grace, would you like to have dinner sometime?" The question hung in the air like something fragile. Grace thought about her tiny apartment, her second-hand furniture, the gap between her life and his that seemed too vast to cross. "I don't think that's a good idea." Something flickered across Trevor's face. "Disappointment, maybe. Can I ask why?" "Because you're a billionaire who gives speeches at fundraisers and I'm a veterinary assistant who lives paycheck to paycheck. We're from different worlds." "I'm not a billionaire," Trevor said quietly. "The company's successful, but that number gets exaggerated. And I don't care about different worlds. I care that talking to you for 20 minutes was the best part of my entire week." Grace wanted to say yes. Every cell in her body screamed to take the chance. But fear was louder, the fear of getting hurt, of being someone's experiment in dating outside his usual circles. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Trevor nodded, accepting her answer with more grace than she probably deserved. "If you change your mind, Dr. Morrison knows how to reach me." He left. Grace stood on the terrace for another hour, watching the city lights and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The roses kept coming every Tuesday. Grace stared at them with new eyes now, wondering if they were connected to Trevor somehow. But that was impossible. The roses had started in March. She'd only met Trevor in July. Unless he'd seen her somewhere before, unless he'd been sending flowers for months without her knowing. No. That was the stuff of fairy tales and movies. Real life didn't work that way. August melted into September. Grace threw herself into work, taking extra shifts to avoid thinking about Trevor's disappointed face. She heard through Dr. Morrison that Trevor had adopted another dog from a rescue organization, a move that somehow made Grace like him even more despite trying not to. On a Tuesday in late September, the rose came with something extra. Tucked into the tissue paper was a small envelope, the first communication in 6 months of deliveries. Grace's hands shook as she opened it. The card inside contained one sentence in elegant handwriting. "I hope these brighten your days the way thoughts of you brighten mine." No signature, no name, just words that made Grace's chest ache with longing and confusion. She called Monica. "I got a note with the rose." What did it say? Grace read it aloud, then asked the question haunting her. "Do you think it could be Trevor Young, the guy from the fundraiser?" "Grace, that was 2 months ago. If he was sending the roses, why wouldn't he have said something when you talked? Maybe he wanted to stay anonymous. Or maybe it's someone completely different and you're obsessing over a guy you turned down for dinner." Monica was probably right. Grace was projecting, seeing patterns where none existed because she couldn't stop thinking about Trevor. She'd looked him up online after the fundraiser, found articles about young industries and their innovative manufacturing techniques, photographs of Trevor at various charity events, always looking slightly uncomfortable in formal wear. Every picture confirmed what she'd felt on the terrace. He was different, genuine, the kind of man she could fall for if she let herself. But she'd said no. The door had closed. October brought cool air and the annual hospital Halloween party for young patients. Grace dressed as a veterinarian, which was lazy but practical, and spent the afternoon helping kids give checkups to stuffed animals. She was showing a 5-year-old how to use a toy stethoscope when Dr. Morrison approached with Trevor Young at his side. Grace nearly dropped the stethoscope. "Grace, you remember Trevor," Dr. Morrison said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "He's donated equipment for our new surgical wing. I'm giving him a tour." "Nice to see you again," Trevor said, his expression carefully neutral. "You too," Grace managed. They stared at each other while Dr. Morrison rambled about surgical equipment. Grace saw the same attraction in Trevor's eyes that she felt coursing through her own body, but also wariness. She'd rejected him. The ball was in her court. "Trevor's also interested in our community outreach programs," Dr. Morrison continued. "Grace runs our pet therapy visits to nursing homes. She's excellent with the elderly residents." "I'm sure she is," Trevor said, never breaking eye contact with Grace. The tour moved on. Grace stood frozen, watching Trevor's back as he walked away. The 5-year-old tugged her sleeve. "Is that your boyfriend?" "No. You look at him like my mommy looks at my daddy." Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths. Grace finished the party on autopilot, her mind spinning. She had to make a decision. Keep hiding behind fear or take a risk on something that might be extraordinary. The next Tuesday, the rose came with another note. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." Grace recognized the quote, a variation of Franklin Roosevelt's famous words. But the message was clear. Someone was encouraging her to be brave, to take chances. Her mysterious sender was pushing her forward. On Wednesday, Grace asked Dr. Morrison for Trevor's contact information. "I thought you weren't interested," her boss said, trying and failing to hide his smile. "I was afraid. I'm still afraid, but I'm trying to be braver." Dr. Morrison wrote down a phone number. "He's a good man, Grace. Give him a chance." Grace stared at the number for 3 hours before finding the courage to type out a text message. "This is Grace Collins. If your dinner invitation is still open, I'd like to accept." The response came within minutes. "How about Saturday at 7? I'll pick you up." Saturday arrived with all the anxiety of a job interview and first date combined. Grace spent her entire paycheck on a new dress, simple but elegant, black fabric that hugged her curves without being obvious. She did her makeup 3 times, curled her hair, changed her shoes twice. When Trevor knocked on her door at exactly 7, Grace opened it to find him holding a white rose her breath caught. "Trevor, I thought you might like one that wasn't a mystery," he said, offering it with a smile that suggested he knew exactly how significant the gesture was. But he couldn't know. The roses were anonymous, unless— "How long have you been sending them?" Grace asked, pieces clicking into place like a puzzle solving itself. Trevor's smile faded into something more serious. "Since March. Since the day I saw you at the coffee shop on 3rd Street talking to a homeless man like he mattered. You bought him breakfast. You sat with him for 20 minutes, and I thought, that's someone extraordinary." Grace's knees went weak. "You've been sending the roses for 7 months. Every Tuesday. I couldn't get you out of my mind after that day. I asked around, found out where you worked. Dr. Morrison told me about you, about how you're kind to every creature that crosses your path. I wanted to brighten your life the way you'd brighten that stranger's morning. Why didn't you just ask me out?" "Because I wanted you to feel special first, to know that someone was thinking of you. And because I'm a coward who watched you for weeks at the hospital before the fundraiser gave me an excuse to finally talk to you." Trevor ran his hand through his hair, looking vulnerable in a way that made Grace's heart ache. "I know this is a lot. If you want me to leave, I'll go. But I had to tell you the truth." Grace stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth or practiced. She just rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring 7 months of Tuesday mornings and mysterious roses and lonely nights into the contact. Trevor responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened. He tasted like mint and possibility. Grace felt like she was falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Trevor rested his forehead against hers. "So dinner's still on?" he asked. "Dinner's definitely on." They went to a small Italian restaurant in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy or pretentious. Trevor had reserved a corner table where they could talk without shouting over other diners. He pulled out her chair, ordered wine, and looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. "Tell me everything," he said. "I want to know all of you." So Grace talked. She told him about growing up in a small town, about losing her parents in a car accident during her junior year of college, about dropping out to work full-time and eventually finding her way to the veterinary hospital. She shared her dreams of maybe becoming a full veterinarian someday, if she could ever afford to go back to school. Trevor listened with complete focus, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. He shared his own story in return, taking over his father's struggling manufacturing company at 25 when his father had a heart attack, working 18-hour days to turn it around, building it into something successful through innovation and treating employees well. "The money's nice," he admitted, "but it's not what matters. The company employs 3,000 people. Those are families depending on decisions I make. That responsibility is what keeps me up at night." "You care about people," Grace observed. "I try to. My father built the company, but he wasn't always kind to the workers. When I took over, I changed that. Better wages, better conditions, profit sharing. Some investors thought I was crazy. But it worked. It worked because people perform better when they're treated with respect." Revolutionary concept, apparently. Grace laughed, feeling more relaxed than she had in years. Trevor was easy to talk to, funny without trying too hard, confident without being arrogant. The evening flew past in a blur of conversation and shared laughter. When he drove her home, Trevor walked her to her apartment door like a gentleman from another era. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "You better," Grace replied, earning a grin that made her stomach flip. He kissed her goodnight, soft and sweet, a promise of more to come. Their second date happened 3 days later because neither could wait until the weekend. Trevor picked her up after work, not caring that she smelled like dog shampoo and antiseptic. They went to a batting cage because Grace had mentioned once loving baseball as a kid. Trevor was terrible at hitting, which made Grace laugh so hard she could barely breathe. "You run a manufacturing empire but can't hit a slow-pitch softball," she teased. "I have hidden weaknesses. You're discovering them all." Their third date was a cooking class where they made pasta from scratch, and Trevor somehow got flour in his hair. Their fourth was a movie they both forgot about, because talking in whispers was more interesting than the plot on screen. By November, they were inseparable. Trevor showed up at the hospital during Grace's lunch breaks with sandwiches from her favorite deli. Grace met Murphy, the world's friendliest golden retriever, who immediately decided she was his second favorite person after Trevor. They fell into an easy rhythm of dinners and walks and nights, spent on Trevor's couch watching terrible reality TV that they both pretended not to enjoy. "I'm crazy about you," Trevor said one night, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "I'm crazy about you too," Grace replied, curling into his side. The roses kept coming every Tuesday, but now Grace knew their source. She kissed Trevor every time one arrived, a thank you for starting something she'd been too afraid to pursue on her own. Christmas brought Trevor home to meet Dr. Morrison formally as Grace's boyfriend, a dinner that involved the entire hospital staff and turned into an impromptu party. Monica cornered Grace in the kitchen. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon." "I know," Grace said, unable to stop smiling. "I still can't believe this is real." "Believe it. You deserve this happiness." Trevor's gift to her was a delicate necklace with a small pendant shaped like a rose. Grace wore it every day, a reminder that sometimes beautiful things came from unexpected places. She gave him a photo album filled with pictures of them over the past months, candid shots that Monica had sneakily taken. Trevor paged through it with an expression so tender that Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "This is the best gift anyone's ever given me," he said quietly. "It's just pictures. It's proof that this is real, that we're real." Grace kissed him, tasting possibility and future on his lips. January marked a year since the first rose arrived. Trevor planned something special, refusing to tell Grace what no matter how much she wheedled. He picked her up on a Tuesday morning, playing hooky from work with a grin that suggested he enjoyed breaking his own rules. "Where are we going? You'll see." They drove to Prestige Florals, the elegant shop Grace had only ever called before. Inside was a wonderland of blooms in every color, the air thick with floral perfume. The owner greeted Trevor by name. "Mr. Young, we have everything ready as you requested." She led them to a back room where a table held 52 white roses, one for every week of the past year. "The woman on the phone told me you'd paid for a year," Grace said, understanding dawning. "Today's the last one." "Today's the last anonymous one," Trevor corrected. He pulled her close, his arms solid around her waist. "From now on, you'll know exactly who they're from if you'll have me." He dropped to one knee. Grace's hands flew to her mouth. "Grace Collins, you are the kindest, most extraordinary person I've ever met. You see beauty in the world that most people miss. You make me want to be better, do better, love better. I fell for you in a coffee shop last March, and I fall more in love with you every single day. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a simple diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. Grace couldn't speak through her tears, could only nod frantically as emotion overwhelmed her. Trevor slid the ring onto her finger and stood, catching her as she launched herself into his arms. They kissed surrounded by roses, the florist clapping and crying herself. "I love you," Grace managed finally. "I love you so much. I love you too. I'm never letting you go." They spent the rest of the day in a happy daze, calling friends and family, making plans. Dr. Morrison insisted on throwing an engagement party. Monica demanded to be maid of honor. Murphy seemed pleased to have Grace around permanently, showing his approval by bringing her his favorite tennis ball. The wedding took place in late spring, a year and 2 months after that first mysterious rose. Grace wore a simple white dress with lace sleeves, her hair loose and flowers woven through it. Trevor wore a dark suit and looked at her like she was the only woman in existence. They exchanged vows in a small garden, surrounded by close friends and overflowing flower arrangements. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Trevor kissed Grace with enough passion to make the guests whistle and cheer. "Mrs. Young," he murmured against her lips. "I like the sound of that." The reception was perfect chaos, dancing and laughter and cake fights that started when Trevor booped frosting on Grace's nose. She retaliated by smashing an entire piece into his face, earning roars of approval from the guests. Later, slow dancing under string lights, Grace rested her head on Trevor's shoulder. "Thank you for the roses," she said softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Best decision I ever made." They honeymooned in Ireland, spending 2 weeks exploring countryside and kissing in ruins, and drinking too much Guinness. Trevor took Grace's photo in front of every castle, building another album of memories. Grace dragged him to sheep farms where she cooed over lambs and made friends with border collies. "You're happiest around animals," Trevor observed, watching her light up while petting a particularly fluffy sheep. "I'm happiest with you," Grace corrected. "The animals are just a bonus." When they returned home, it was to a new house that Trevor had been secretly preparing. Not a mansion, but a comfortable home in a good neighborhood with a large backyard for Murphy and whatever other animals they inevitably added to the family. "You bought a house?" Grace asked, standing in the empty living room. "I bought our house. I want to fill it with you, with kids someday, with all the messy, beautiful chaos of a real life together." Grace cried again, happy tears that were becoming a regular occurrence. They made love in the empty house, christening their new beginning with whispered promises and tangled limbs. Grace continued working at the hospital because she loved it, because helping animals mattered to her. Trevor never asked her to quit, never suggested his money meant she shouldn't work. Instead, he donated funds to expand the hospital's facilities, creating a state-of-the-art surgical wing and funding a scholarship program for veterinary students. "You're trying to make the world better because of me," Grace said, understanding his motivations. "I'm trying to honor what you taught me, that kindness matters, that paying attention to the ones everyone else overlooks changes everything." 2 years after their wedding, Grace enrolled in veterinary school. It had been Trevor's idea, suggesting she had the passion and intelligence to pursue her dream. He supported her through late-night study sessions and the stress of exams, never complaining about the time it took away from them. "This is important," he insisted when she apologized for the 100th time. "I'm proud of you." Murphy gained a sister, a rescue pit bull named Sadie who'd been slated for euthanasia before Grace intervened. Trevor came home to find the dog in their living room and simply asked, "What's her name?" "Sadie. I couldn't let them put her down. She's so sweet. Then she stays. She's family now, their house filled with life." Grace's school friends came for study groups. Trevor's business partners visited for dinners that always ran long because everyone loved Grace's cooking and easy conversation. They hosted Christmas for Dr. Morrison and Monica, creating new traditions to replace the ones Grace had lost with her parents. On their third anniversary, Trevor surprised Grace with white roses filling every room of their house. "You're ridiculous," she said, laughing through tears. "I'm in love. There's a difference." That night, Grace told him she was pregnant. Trevor lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while Murphy and Sadie barked excitedly, sensing something momentous had happened. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby." Trevor set her down gently, his hands trembling as they rested on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to be a father. A great father. The best." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Me too. We'll figure it out together." Their daughter arrived in early spring, 7 pounds of perfection with dark hair like her father and her mother's gentle spirit. They named her Rose Grace Young after the flowers that had started everything. Trevor held his daughter with the same careful attention he gave everything important, looking down at her with awe. "She's perfect. You're perfect. How did I get this lucky?" "We both got lucky," Grace replied, exhausted and elated. "This is everything I never knew I needed." Rose grew up surrounded by love and animals, her first word puppy and her favorite game helping Mama with the dogs. When Grace finished veterinary school, they turned part of Young Industries' land into an animal rescue facility, combining their passions into something meaningful. "Dr. Collins Young's Rescue Ranch," Trevor said, unveiling the sign with a flourish. "It's too much," Grace protested weakly, already imagining the animals they could save. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough to match what you've given me." The rescue thrived, becoming known for rehabilitation work with difficult cases. Grace's reputation grew, people bringing animals from neighboring states because they'd heard about the woman who could reach any creature. Trevor supported it all, funding expansions and using his business connections to drum up donations. They had 2 more children, a son named Thomas and another daughter named Lily. The house rang with laughter and chaos, birthday parties and scraped knees and bedtime stories. Trevor cut back his hours at the company, prioritizing family dinners and soccer games and dance recitals. "You're missing the board meeting," Grace reminded him one afternoon when he left work early to watch Rose's school play. "The board can survive without me. Rose only gets 1 4th-grade performance." Grace fell more in love with him daily, watching him be present for their children in ways her own parents had been before she lost them. He healed parts of her she hadn't realized were still broken, filling her life with so much love there was no room for old grief. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to Prestige Florals. The owner remembered them, pulling out photos from their engagement day that she'd kept all these years. "You two started something special," she said, showing them the wall of photos in her back room. Other couples had been inspired by their story, ordering anonymous flowers for loved ones or using the shop for their own proposals. "We became a legend," Trevor joked, but his eyes were soft on Grace. "You became my legend," Grace replied. "My mysterious flower sender who changed everything." That night, Rose asleep in her room and the younger kids with Grace's friend Monica for a sleepover, Trevor recreated their first date. Same restaurant, same corner table, even the same wine. They talked like they had 10 years ago, rediscovering each other amid the beautiful chaos of their shared life. "Do you ever regret it?" Trevor asked, taking her hand across the table. "Marrying me, the life we built? Never. Not for a single second. You gave me a family, Trevor. Purpose and love and everything I thought I'd lost when my parents died. How could I regret that? I worry sometimes that I pushed you, that the roses were too much." Grace squeezed his hand. "The roses were perfect. They made me feel seen when I thought I was invisible. And you didn't push. You waited. You gave me time to be brave enough to choose this. I'd wait forever for you. Good thing you don't have to." They made love that night like newlyweds, rediscovering familiar territory with the ease of deep knowledge and the excitement of enduring passion. Trevor whispered his love against her skin, cataloging all the ways she amazed him. Grace responded in kind, showing him without words how completely he owned her heart. Years passed in a blur of happiness. Rose went to college studying veterinary medicine like her mother. Thomas discovered a passion for engineering, spending summers interning at Young Industries. Lily wanted to be an artist, filling the house with paintings and sculptures that her father displayed with pride. Grace and Trevor aged together, gray threading through their hair and laugh lines deepening around their eyes. They were beautiful in their maturity, comfortable in their skin and their love. On the 20th anniversary of that first white rose, Trevor surprised Grace with a trip back to the coffee shop where he'd first seen her. It looked different, updated with new furniture and a modern aesthetic. But the corner table where Grace had sat with the homeless man remained. "You sat right there," Trevor said, pointing. "You were wearing a yellow sweater. You smiled at him like he mattered. He did matter. That's when I knew, that exact moment, I thought, I'm going to marry that woman. You were very confident for someone who didn't even know my name." "I was certain. Some things you just know." They sat at that table drinking coffee, remembering who they'd been 20 years ago. The people they'd become were better, shaped by love and partnership and choosing each other every single day. "Thank you for the roses," Grace said, the words ritual now, spoken every anniversary. "Thank you for seeing me," Trevor replied, "for taking a chance on the stranger sending you flowers. Best mystery I ever solved." Their children gave them grandchildren, beautiful babies who called them Grandma and Grandpa, and filled the house with new chaos. Rose married a fellow veterinarian and took over the rescue full-time. Thomas became CEO of Young Industries when Trevor finally retired. Lily's art shows drew crowds, her pieces commanding prices that made Grace shake her head in wonder. Grace and Trevor traveled, visiting places they'd dreamed about during those early dates. They walked Irish coastlines and Italian vineyards, always coming home to the house they'd built together, the life they'd created from mysterious flowers and brave choices. "I love you," Trevor said one ordinary Tuesday morning, 40 years after he'd sent the first rose. "I love you too," Grace replied, the words as true as they'd been the first time. They spent the day at the rescue, working side by side with animals that needed them. They had dinner with their children and grandchildren, the table overflowing with food and conversation and laughter. They went to bed in each other's arms, grateful for another day in a life full of them. The white roses still came every Tuesday, Trevor's standing order never canceled. Grace pressed them in books like she had that first year, preserving beauty and memory. Their house held hundreds of them now, dried petals marking time and constancy. "You're still sending them?" their grandson asked one day, watching Trevor place the weekly order. "Always," Trevor replied. "I'll send them until the day I die, and I've arranged for them to continue after that." "That's so romantic, Grandpa." "Your grandma deserves romance every single day." And he meant it. Trevor had spent 40 years proving his love through actions big and small, through roses and presents and choosing Grace in every moment. She had done the same, building a life with him that honored the unexpected gift of those first mysterious flowers. They were proof that love could start with a gesture, that paying attention mattered, that taking chances on mystery could lead to everything worth having. Grace had received anonymous flowers for a year. The billionaire sender had revealed himself, and in doing so, he'd given her not just flowers, but a lifetime of extraordinary ordinary days filled with love. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 3 generations of family, Trevor stood to give a toast. His hair was white now, his movements slower, but his eyes on Grace burned with the same intensity as that fundraiser terrace decades ago. 50 years ago, I saw a woman show kindness to a stranger, and I fell in love. I sent her flowers because I didn't know how else to tell her she mattered. She took a chance on me despite every reason not to. Grace, you are still the best thing that ever happened to me. Every Tuesday for 52 years, I've sent you roses. That's 2,704 roses, and not one of them could capture how much I love you. Grace stood, tears streaming down her face, and kissed her husband while their family cheered. The taste was familiar, home, half a century of devotion and partnership. 2,704 roses, she whispered against his lips, and I've loved you through every single one. They danced surrounded by family and flowers, 2 people who'd taken separate paths and found each other through mystery and fate. The white roses gleamed in the candlelight, eternal symbols of a love that had started with anonymity and bloomed into everything. As the party wound down and grandchildren were taken home sleepy and full of cake, Grace and Trevor sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky gold and pink. "No regrets?" Trevor asked their ritual question. "Not one single regret. You. Only that I didn't send flowers sooner." Grace laughed, the sound carrying across their property, past the house that held their history and the rescue that held their legacy. "We had exactly the right timing. Everything happened the way it needed to. The way it was meant to," Trevor agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead, hands linked, hearts synchronized after 50 years of beating in tandem. The mysterious flowers had been just the beginning. The real gift was everything that came after. The choice to love through ordinary days and extraordinary moments, through challenges and triumphs, through the whole beautiful mess of building a life together. Grace Collins had received anonymous flowers every week for a year. Trevor Young had revealed himself and asked her to take a chance. She had said yes, despite fear, despite logic, despite every reason to protect her heart. And in return, she'd received a love story that spanned 5 decades and counting, a family that filled her days with joy, a partnership that made her better than she'd been alone. The roses had been the invitation. Love had been the answer. And happiness, hard-won and cherished, had been the reward. As Tuesday morning dawned on another week, another year in their shared life, a single white rose arrived at their door. Trevor retrieved it with a smile, presenting it to Grace with a flourish that made her laugh. "Your weekly delivery, Mrs. Young." "Thank you, Mr. Young. Same time next week." "Every week until forever ends." Grace tucked the rose behind her ear and kissed her husband, tasting 50 years of tomorrows in that single perfect moment. The flowers had brought them together. Love had made them stay. And gratitude for the mystery that started everything kept them present in the gift of each ordinary, extraordinary day.